adopting safety science concepts, that is a major problem for us in the cybersecurity world because we're too focused on making users aware as opposed to stopping the problem.
This is a Security Weekly production. Security Weekly is a resource of Cyber Risk Alliance.
The Cybersecurity Collaborative, in conjunction with Cyber Reason, is proud to present CISO Stories. Each week, CISO Stories takes a deep dive on security leadership. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC.
I'm joined today by Ira Winkler. Ira, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
I know that you're really an author. The book I know, I think, is You Can Stop Stupid, which I think is available for purchase now. And you've been called the Awareness Crusader, and I think you've got the bona fides in security. So I'm happy to have you and looking forward to talking with you.
Me too.
So let's jump right in. The spirit of the show is trying to understand you. And I think before we talk about security, maybe we dive a little bit into your early life. Let's fade back in time. Of course, not that long ago, I'm sure. What did you dream of being as a child? Was it always security is it for me? I want to be James Bond, or was it something else?
Ironically, I always wanted to be an astronaut, a veterinarian, or a spy.
I would have been impressed if you'd done all three, by the way. There aren't many astronaut, veterinarian, spies, but were those the three things all at once, or were they different phases in your life?
If somebody asked me what I want to be, it was always an astronaut, a veterinarian, or a spy. Not for the reasons people would normally think. Like veterinarian, my uncle was a veterinarian. I did like animals, but my uncle was the wealthiest person I knew. I'm like, hey, this might be a good one. Then the astronaut, I wanted to be Captain Kirk. That's all could say. I think everybody can relate to that. And then for a spy, everybody's thinking James Bond. No, Maxwell Smart. I always thought that was cool. So those are my early influences.
I'm sensing pragmatism and certainly a good understanding of television. I mean, first of all, everyone has to love Bill Shatner as a thing. But as you went, which of those sort of left the list first? Which one sort of vanished, and how old were you?
So there's actually a continuum. I always thought, even when I was in high school, I was writing to NASA. When they started hiring astronauts for the space shuttles and everything, they didn't have an interest in me, but I still was like, okay, got to go get my college degree. But, you think, okay, what's the career path for a spy? Not intuitively obvious going there. But what happened was I decided, okay, I'm going to go to college and become a veterinarian. Anyway, freshman year of college, I said, I kind of have really disliked biology. So in essence, there went my veterinary career. So then for a while, I thought, okay, grew up in New York. If you're not going to be a doctor, you'll be a lawyer. Started doing that. Really wasn't thrilled at the moment with that per se. The astronaut spy stuff was still kind of not there. And then what happened was around my junior year of college, I all of a sudden saw in the school newspaper, there was an advertisement where the Marines were looking for pilots. And I was like, John Glenn was a Marine pilot before he was an astronaut.
Oh, there you go.
I'm going to be John Glenn. So I applied for the Marines. I got made into aviation officer, became an aviation officer candidate, went to officer candidate school. And then during there, I hated the haircut. But in the process, I learned that there were people in the Marines who were counterintelligence, and they got to keep their hair long. So all of a sudden, when you go through officer candidate school, you're not committed to becoming a Marine. And what happened was they're like, okay, sign the commitment papers. We'll send you for civilian flight lessons, which was part of the aviation officer candidate program, where once you complete OCS, they'll get you flight lessons. And what happened was I'm like, well, what about if I go into counterintelligence instead? And they're like, well, counterintelligence is not a line position, line being not a combat position. You have to do a combat position first. And I'm like, okay, they'll just do your flight commitment, then you could do anything you want. And I'm like, I'm like 20 years old, going to graduate college. And I was like thinking, hey, wait a second. Flight commitment is like in the Marines. First thing, you got to go to what they call the basic school for 6 months, which is just how to be a Marine officer. Then after that, there's a year and a half of flight school, which is 2 years. Then the flight commitment is 4.5 years.
Oh, wow.
But that all assumes that there's not even a gap between exiting one school to the next, which is rare. So, I'm thinking this is going to be 7 years. That's a third of my life. But anyway, in the meantime, I ended up applying to NSA. I didn't even know I applied to them technically. There was just like these booklets that were a bunch of puzzles. I'm like, this is cool. But because I thought, hey, really not thrilled about being a Marine, veterinary didn't work. I'm like, hey, maybe I'll join the Foreign Service. So I went to find out about the Foreign Service and went to the career counselor. And then they're like, well, there's a booklet outside. If you could do some of the puzzles, maybe you want to try to take that test. I'm like, this book here? And he's like, yeah. I go, I finished it. He's like, you finished all of those puzzles? I go, yeah. He's like, take the test. So I took the test, and that was the NSA, what they call career qualification test or whatever that was. And I did really well, and NSA ended up hiring me.
So you didn't get to NASA, but you did get to NSA. I can appreciate that. What did you do your degree in the end? If it wasn't veterinary and you hated biology, what did you wind up doing and finishing there?
I became a psychology major. Why? Because that was the easiest major to get.
Don't tell my wife that. She has that.
Yeah, I hate to say it's a true story. At Syracuse, where I went, you had 6 courses, basically was the major. All of them had multiple choice tests, and about 60% of all those classes seemed to overlap with each other. So
you started on this make money as a vet, maybe be an astronaut, and you by dint of nudging here and nudging there, you wind up a psych major and in the NSA, which is a big shift. You look at each step and it kind of makes sense. But did you find a passion for psychology, and did you find an application for it, or was it just a stepping stone at that point?
I have to admit, one reason why a lot of people didn't, maybe the tests were easy for me, but I kind of did like psychology as a whole, as understanding people. I mean, we're joking now about me, I'm like missing Judge Judy to talk to you now. One of the reasons I love Judge Judy is because it's fun to watch how she interacts with people, how she figures out who's telling the truth and who's lying and so on. And, I find all that stuff kind of fascinating. The reality was that the psychology major was like easy to get. I really didn't necessarily use it per se. I mean, I was an intelligence analyst, my first job at NSA officially. And that I basically, it wasn't human intelligence where I was analyzing a psychology of people. It was basically all collected data is called intelligence. And I was analyzing a certain type of collected data.
Right.
And putting out reports based on what I found. Then I got into the computer intern program, and mostly because I really hated that job. And I found out the computer people got paid more because when I did really well on the tests, and NSA said, okay, well, we can give you a computer internship. We could give you a cryptanalytic internship. They said computers. I'm like, I hate computers. I want nothing to do with them. Then they're like, cryptanalysis? I go, I'm not looking at ones and zeros all day. Mm-hmm. And then, ironically, my first job when I get the computer internship was I was programming cryptanalytics on a Cray computer. And I'm like, wow, this kind of is bizarre. I hate computers. I hate cryptanalysis. And a year and a half later, now that's my daily job. It's kind of ironic.
When in that sequence did you realize that you were doing, quote, security, or did you? And maybe a follow-up question is, when did you identify with it, or did you?
So here's the thing. When I look back now, working at NSA was pretty much all what you would call penetration testing. Mm-hmm. For the most part, I was always on the offensive side, analyzing the type of information. I was looking for vulnerabilities in foreign communications, for lack of a better term. Then when I got into the computer internship, cryptanalysis, in other words, breaking machine code, that's kind of heavy duty security job. I didn't look at that way. I looked at I was programming ones and zeros all the time. Then my next job was designing computer systems that, was designing collection systems, but really was programming. So, and testing and stuff, it wasn't really security per se. Then the next one was an acquisitions office, which was the next one, tactical research and development, where I was supporting field units and like running around in little green trucks around Europe. That really was providing computer support. And that was not necessarily, but, it wasn't until after I look back 20 years later, I'm like, wow, I'm kind of filling out my CISSP application in 1994 or whatever. And I'm like, wow, cryptanalysis is security related. Analyzing problems in communication systems, that's kind of security related too. So it was when it was convenient, I realized I was doing security. I mean, even, programming multi-level secure systems after I left the government, that's kind of security related as well. But it was really, at the time I was just doing computer stuff.
In the mid-90s, we were drawing the event set to expand and solidify what I think now a lot of people think is sort of hard-coded, right? The InfoSec/security/cyber, and apologies to people who differ over definitions. But it was coalescing. So you took your CISSP, and then at what point did you leave NSA, and what did the post-NSA world look like for you now as a newly minted security person? If I got the sequence wrong, please correct it.
Well, so I left NSA in 1990 or 91. I forgot the specific year. Mm-hmm. And at the time, all I did was I went to work at NSA contractors. So I don't know if you consider that, as essentially really working leaving for NSA. Yeah, it's not really leaving. You just got paid 50% more. So that's what I was doing then. And then after a while, what happened, I was working for SAIC at the time, which is now mostly called Leidos, I think. Mm-hmm. And one day what happened was they came to me instead of going to the Pentagon, can you make a few phone calls? And I'm like, what do you want me to do? They're like, well, call this company up and find out who they use as an overnight carrier. I'm like, okay. Then they're like, call the company back and find out, what systems they have in the library. I go, well, this is easy and it's also stupid. Why am I doing this? They're like, well, we have a contract with this large investment bank, because we're trying to get into the commercial world. The company's too heavily focused on the government world. So we thought cybersecurity or information security was the way to go. And I'm like, okay, in that case, who cares who they use as an overnight carrier? Let's get their account numbers and let's get shipping data. Who cares what systems they have in the library? Let's get user IDs and passwords. They're like, oh, that's a good idea. And then 3 days later, they pretty much just left me alone. And 3 days later, I had logons to the EFT systems that they had. So, and it was just a matter of, frankly, applying the intelligence perspective because, I did take, for a variety of reasons, I did have some training in human elicitation, human intelligence collection, stuff like that. But really, it was just an intelligence focus because everybody at the time was doing this just as a computer access thing, like a hacking. I didn't care about the quote unquote hacking. I was always focused on what's the goal? What am I stealing? What am I getting? Much like in an NSA, you don't care how you get it. You just care that you get it and what it says. And I was like, okay, what's actually valuable for this organization and how do I get access to it? And then the methods I used when I was limited to social engineering, okay, I'm just going to use social engineering. When I found out I needed to VPN into the corporate network because everything was still on a modem and everything like that at the time, I convinced the company's help desk to send me a new computer by pretending to be a big executive that was traveling. So anyway, I did all that. And then at the time, I was reading an Anthony Robbins book. And it's like, okay, how do you be a success in life? And it's like model people who are. And I'm in the Annapolis, Maryland area. And the only person I could think of who was famous at the time that came from Annapolis was Tom Clancy, who wrote books. I'm like, I'm going to write books on how to do whatever I do. And I literally wrote a sample chapter and came up with a book on social engineering. I sent it to my agent at the time who thought this was great. Then the agent was reading this. She's like, "Are you basically telling people how to be a liar?" I'm like, "No."
People don't need instructions on how to do that. I think they're good at it. Yeah.
I go, "That's part of it," but she's like, "I can't represent this." And then anyway, what happened was I had the sample chapter together, and then there was a conference, and I love to travel. And my company had a policy that if you have papers accepted at a professional conference, they had to send you. So I saw this security conference in Salt Lake City and thought, okay, I'm just going to submit I've never been to Salt Lake City. Let me just reformat this sample chapter. And I sent it to the conference. It got accepted, and then I was presenting it there, and everybody was calling it the seminal work in social engineering. And I'm like, what does seminal mean? What does social engineering mean?
Yeah, I wouldn't go too much into the root of seminal, but yeah, no. It sounds like you were actually saying you knew and lived it, and it didn't seem remarkable. This, by the way, is part of the Dunning-Kruger effect that as an expert, you underestimate the value of what you know. And part of you is probably going, how do you guys not know this, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing was, the first time I was calling the investment bank, I distinctly remember this. I'm like calling up the first person I got a hold of who I was going to ask for a password. Again, I got them to send me a computer. I got them to give me names and employee ID numbers and telephone numbers for people in the company. But now I was actually for the first time talking to somebody, and I was talking to this woman, and then I'm like, okay, so what's your user ID? Okay, now on this system where your user ID is this, what's your password? And she's like, Felix. I'm like, and I was like, holy shit, she actually gave me this. And I'm trying to compose myself because I never thought anybody in their right mind would. But then I'm like, oh, you have a cat, don't you? She's like, yeah, how'd you know? I'm like, never mind. And I don't know if half the people who are listening to this would understand the reference. But anyway, I'm just sitting there and it's like, wow, this is kind of easy. And then what happened was I had all the success. I was like, people were doing this. Then my, SAIC at the time, I could speak about it now. We got the contract when Vladimir Levin, the guy who was the Citibank hacker, Citibank, somehow SAIC got the contract to investigate it. And I ended up on the investigation team. And, that wasn't necessarily, let's just say I did a bunch of investigations, but, when there's one bank robbery, you can witness hundreds, because people didn't know what was going on when they didn't know. And we'd watch, people would use public networks to access not just Citibank, but others. And I was watching criminals who were on these systems who were like, they were accessing a VMS system and they were trying to type Unix commands. And I'm like sitting there, if this moron would only type DOS commands, he'd get so much further. Because, he didn't even realize the language of the system he was working on.
That's leaky abstraction right there. That's it in essence, right? That when you make an abstraction layer and people interact with it and don't know what's happening to the hood, they're less efficient and prone to error. Is this at the heart of your book, You Can Stop Stupid? Is because I've always felt we got to stop blaming users for things and put them in the middle of our designs. I haven't read the book, but is that what you get into in that book?
Here's the thing where I've got into, because I've obviously been doing awareness for a long period of time. And, I got into it mostly because of the social engineering where people wanted me, wow, you're really good at conning people. Now we need you to help fix it. I'm like, sure, I'll come in. I'll do my presentation. And there was one company, major pharmaceutical type company everybody would have heard of. And they had me come in and I raped and pillaged the company within 4 hours. Pretty much I was talking to the CISO and he was joking with me. He's like, Ira, I'll give you 3-hour head start where you can head to Mexico. Then I'm going to have to send people after you. Because that was the point where it was like the holy shit stuff within 4 hours, pretty much. And that's just, again, it is what it is. It was so easy. And then I would come in and then I presented what they should do. And 6 months later, they had me come back and it was worse than when I was there before. There were some successes, but it was still worse than I was there before. And this was the first time that I realized what was going on because, when I came back, the CISO said, okay, here's what we want you to do. You do what you do, but when you're done, I need you to meet with this guy because you screwed over his systems big time, and he wants to know how you did that. So I'm done. I go meet with the guy. The guy's like, so why do you target my systems? I go, this is going to sound cliche, but that's where all the money is, for lack of a better term. He's like, okay, I get that. And then I told him how he did. I go, now I have a question for you. I go, why is it worse now than it was 6 months ago? He's like, oh, that's easy. So what happened was, he's like, when you were here 6 months ago, the CEO is horrified. He puts out this note saying how important computer security is at the time. He told people what he wants them to do and, gave them general stuff. And he's like, and what do? He's like, you get a message that says donate to the United Way campaign. You look at it, you say, okay, that's good. Put it in the trash. Sexual harassment is bad. Notice you get, yes, I agree. You read it, you put it in the trash. It's like security is good. You read it, you put it in the trash. He's like, here's a message that we just got from the physical security person. He said how, for example, there were a bunch of smash and grabs because all these, it was a Southern California type company. They all have these big boulders outside windows because they don't want to have grass because they don't want to water it. So they have these decorative boulders outside glass windows. Criminals would take these big boulders, throw it through the window, jump in the office, grab a computer and run. And then we got this message the other day from the physical security officer. Physical security officer says, we have these problems. He goes, to stop these problems, here's what we're going to do. We're going to make sure that if you have a window office, at the end of the day, you're going to go ahead, you're going to lock your office, make sure all the shades are down, lights are off. Your supervisor is therefore going to go ahead and go down and check the doors to see if they're locked and walk around the building to make sure that all the windows are shades down, everything like that. We're going to have security guards check this every day. On the first violation, you will get a warning, as will your supervisor. On the second violation, you may be fired. Now, stop and think what that does. He goes, this tells us exactly what the situation is, what the problem is, what's expected from us. Mm-hmm. You don't see that from cybersecurity programs. That's when I realized that we have a problem in the cybersecurity world. But I was still doing awareness programs. But the problem is, way too often, they're putting out information, but it's not addressing the root of the problem. With my book, I started realizing that there's a concept that I've been referring to and evolving over the last few years called user-initiated loss. It's not a problem that the users are unaware. The problem is that the users are in a position to initiate a loss. And the fact they can initiate the loss is the first problem. The reality, though, is that once they initiate the loss, the first thing we should do is stop the user from being in the position to initiate a loss, if at all possible. Then we need to give them a user experience, and the user experience should be to guide them in the right way, which is another aspect. And then then awareness might help, but we also have to assume that the user might be either malicious, they might be unaware, they might know what to do and be well-meaning, but they just have too many things going on and don't have time to do things right. And all of those issues create problems that we are there to address. But focusing on users just because they are the proximity of the error, adopting safety science concepts, that is a major problem for us in the cybersecurity world because we're too focused on making users aware as opposed to stopping the problem, which is users are in the position to initiate a loss. Now, I could keep beating that to death, but I'll wait to see if you have questions to help focus it properly.
No, I think that's good. I think your passion for this is evident. Maybe you shift gears a little bit and say, aside from writing at the moment, do you have any other passions or hobbies, even if we get away from security? And by the way, I'm assuming writing is a passion. If I'm wrong on that, if you feel that it's a burden you have to undertake, or if you feel like it's a duty, feel free to correct me. But I know you like Judge Judy. I infer that you have a cat, by the way.
Yeah. Well, I might still have a cat. I'm not sure yet.
For those listening, we did remove a small segment when his cat escaped the house. So And the cat's name is Chewie. So am I right that you are also a Star Wars fan? Is that a Chewbacca reference there?
That is a Chewbacca reference, but the cat came with the name already. I enjoy Star Wars, but I don't know if I would actually purposefully name my pet after Chewie. So the name came inherited. That's all I'll say. But yeah, if you ask me about passions, it's like I'm really passionate about security. I'm really passionate about, for lack of a better term, trying to make it better. It's frustrating to see like well-meaning people, like awareness professionals, who really want to do their job well and get frustrated that they can't get the support they need. They can't get the budget they need. And the reason is I tell CISOs this as well. I've been telling CISOs this for 2 decades, like in my first books, Corporate Espionage, back in 1997. I said the problem is security CISOs get the budgets that they deserve, not the budgets that they need, and they need to learn to deserve more. That's the fundamental problem. And the way this happens is awareness is a valuable tool, but it's just a tactic. And I'm just passionate about trying to get people to understand that, the human problem, as we refer to it, it requires a strategy, which requires both governance, technology, as well as awareness. So, for example, a company like CyberReason, your software has more to do to stop the human problem than awareness does, as an example. Because awareness, you try to get people to do things consistently. You try to get people to do things right, and you provide them guidance, and it will fail just like all technology and every other tool will fail. But it kind of fails at a higher rate than any software normally does. And that's the problem. So, for example, if you're like doing behavioral analytics to look at activity on a PC, for example, behavioral analytics and detecting bad actions is much more effective in stopping, for example, a phishing attack in theory than telling somebody, be aware of phishing attacks.
Couldn't agree more.
And, I'm trying to get this message across. Like awareness, we have awareness successes every day. Every time somebody doesn't click on a message, it's a success. Every time somebody does something right or helps an employee that there's not an incident, it's a success. But the only way you have a success is if technology, like email filters, let the attack through. Oh, sorry. For those listening, I now have a cat meowing at the door, so it looks like I still have a cat.
The more the merrier. You got to let him in. We don't mind the noise. There you go.
He didn't bring friends with him. But just to the point, and we need to get awareness people to understand. I've tried to popularize a concept back 3 years ago called the Human Security Officer, who's supposed to consolidate both the governance, the technology, and the awareness together to address it as a strategy as opposed to a bunch of separate topics. So, for example, you'll have one person inside an organization implement CyberReason and another person implement, an awareness program, but those two aren't talking to each other and they need to talk. And so anyway, sorry, I'm going to beat that to death if I don't stop and let you get the next question.
No, that's okay. Actually, to my chagrin, we're coming towards the end of our time. So I've got 3 questions for you. The first is a choose your own adventure. You may choose to answer either if you have a book recommendation that isn't one you've written, or a guilty pleasure. And cats are not allowed, and nor is Judge Judy. Which of those 2 would you like to answer?
Okay, well, I'm going to put in the cheap plug that books I would enjoy and everybody should is You Can't Stop Stupid. I'm not going to lie about that. That's a good book. But if I were to recommend other books or a passion, in all honesty, I have to stop and think. I'm going to give you 2 answers that are kind of related. Travel and scuba diving. I'm also a master scuba diver trainer. The reason I became a trainer was because I love diving and I just want more of it. But likewise, travel, I love to see the world. I love speaking. Again, it's to try to get the message out, but you really do need to go out, get to meet people, get to talk to other professionals, see how people around the world do it differently, both from a security perspective as well as culture. And you just need to go ahead and make sure that you get to experience as much of life as possible. And again, there's 206 other countries out there with a few other billion people out there. Should try to see as much and meet as many as you can.
And I'm going to skip to a final question. I have so many I want to ask you. It's this. I've noticed, by the way, we have several people who've been scuba divers on the show. There's some themes that at some point I'm going to look back over 2 or 3 seasons and go, hey, let's pull people together and do some fun stuff. So I might or might not pull on the scuba divers who've been on the show before, but would you be interested in taking part in a poker game? And actually behind the scenes, we've talked about other games with other security people and possibly even record it so the audience can enjoy it. Would you be interested in being part of that?
I would. I'm not normally a poker player, but frankly, just to get out and meet people and do something interesting, I'm always up for it.
Excellent. I don't think we can play poker underwater, but I'm sure we can have a fun time. If not poker, there are also other games we could play, board games and such. And it is, most of us are in quarantine, and at least at the time of this recording, we might have to do it over Zoom. So there could be an opportunity to find games that are uniquely played online. So Ira, thank you so much for being on, and thank you so much for sharing with us. I really appreciated it, and I hope we get a chance to talk again soon.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the opportunity as well. Sorry about the cat issue, but it probably added one little flair you weren't expecting to make it that much more interesting or aggravating as your
we might just keep the whole thing because it's who we are, right? Kids, dogs,
hearing
cats,
my Portuguese stepson going, "Meu Deus."
All right. Thank you, Ira. Have a great day.
Cybereason is the champion for today's defenders, providing an endpoint security platform to prevent, detect, and respond to malicious operations on computers, mobile devices, servers, and the cloud. Cybereason. End cyber attacks from endpoints to the enterprise to everywhere. Learn more at cybereason.com/CISO stories.